Hello, this is Raoul LeBlanc from IHS Market, and I am here today to talk about what's new in the data in Performance Evaluator. And today's topic is stack benches. This is pretty cool stuff. Okay, so if I go and take a look at what we're doing, here's some things I want you to remember if you remember nothing else, is IHS is applying its geologic knowledge to determine which reservoirs, and sometimes more specifically which benches in those reservoirs, are being targeted by wells in the Oklahoma STACK play. So this is an interesting process. It relies on a whole bunch of proprietary information around interpreted tops. You will be able to notify yourself or to understand which wells we have picked because in the reservoir category in Performance Evaluator, you will see the words IHS ProdFit. ProdFit stands for Producing Zone from Interpreted Tops. That'll tell you which ones we have picked. We are setting out this process. We have a fair bit of well control, and we think we have a great stab at it, and so they should be reliable. However, they will change in the next little while. So a couple of things I'm going to go over as we look at the data itself, but essentially what you see is this is a complex puzzle. It's a mosaic of different reservoirs in different areas, and no benches available across the entire footprint of the play, and at the same time no acreage has all of the benches. So it's an interesting patchwork, if you will. Thus far, it's been pretty much the Merrimack show. The Osage shows some interesting signs. It's the second largest set of reservoirs, and there are other reservoirs that certain players are targeting, sometimes with good effect. We'll talk about that. You know, the heart of the play, we'll talk about where it is. It's actually got great multi-zone potential, sort of rivaling, if you will, some of the Permian acreage. However, it is small, and so while this play is wonderful for people who are there, it's not a big giant geographic play like certainly like the Wolf Camp on the Permian side or the Wolf Camp on the Midland side or even the Bone Spring, and it's also nowhere near as large as some of the great big extensive plays like the Eagle Ford, which are single zone or largely single zone, but are still enormous, or the Marcellus Utica. Okay, with that, let's turn to the data. First thing I'd like to do is take a look at the spatial pattern. So here we are. You can see the wells there in central Oklahoma. Let's zoom in here and start to take a look. As many of you are familiar, the colors on this map represent the quintiles of peak per lateral foot productivity, and as such represent an overall look at the lifetime productivity and therefore economics of the well. So there's my top quintile, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Now I want to emphasize this because I want you to note that there's not a very strong pattern. We do have good wells in a number of portions of the play. However, as you continue to look at it, you do start to see a few patterns. One thing you'll note is there's a number of very strong wells here. That's not only the first quintile, but also the second. So I have a nice concentration here. I have a concentration actually up in this corridor in the northeastern portion of the county. And then I've got actually some great wells out here in Dewey County off to the west. So let me do that again and watch those three areas. One in here, one up there, and one out there. Those all have relatively few poor wells, particularly over here in Dewey County. There's almost no fourth quintile and few fourths. And then the third, second, and first. Okay, now that's fine, and we're used to doing that. What we want to do is we want to intersect that with the benches. So let's take a quick look at where the benches are. I have the Cherokee up here. We'll take a look at all of these four. I got Hunton around the edges. I have unbenched Merrimack, mostly down here. We don't have good enough well control to get exactly the benches we want on those yet. And then I've got lower Merrimack and upper. These are the two main zones, and I want you to note that they are not really have a strong overlap. The lower Merrimack is more on the northern part of the area of intense development, and the upper Merrimack is more to the south and to the east. In terms of the other big reservoir, the Osage is mostly on the northern portions of the play, and the upper Osage is more on the east and down into the southeast. So we're not having a place that's got really all of the reservoirs being drilled everywhere at all times. I'd like to spend the rest of the time focused on this dashboard. And what do we have here? Let's review this real carefully here. So here what I have is the same map that you just saw. The quality is in the color, the hotter the better. And the shape will represent the reservoir that has been targeted, or set of benches that is being targeted. I've excluded a number of the smaller reservoirs that are sort of miscellaneous at this point. What do we have down here? Down here are the actual production curves. So this is liquids on top. So this is my oil production average, again, by the reservoir groupings that I have, the bench groupings that I have. The same thing here on the bottom for gas. So for example, if you take a look at the Upper Merrimack, you can see that it has production average typical peak production for all the set of Upper Merrimack wells of about 556 barrels a day on the peak month, and at the same time it has gas production of about 1.7 million cubic feet a day. I also have some rank charts here, which should be helpful. Over here is a rank by operator. So I have the operators across the bottom, and you can see here each operator. The height of the bar represents the well count on the left-hand axis. And the colors tell you which zones they are targeting, which are the reservoirs they are targeting. So I can take a look at this, and I can see that Oklahoma Energy, for example, right here, is targeting mostly upper Osage, okay, with relatively few of the other zones, right? Whereas Newfield is really focused on the upper Merrimack and the lower Merrimack. So that gives you an idea of the operators, and the black line by which all the operator names are sorted is the average peak per lateral foot. So you have the highest peak per lateral foot average over on the left and the lowest over on the right. This bottom rank chart is similarly, except I've inverted things a little bit. Now I have the reservoir groupings across the bottom with IHS Prodfit, as you can see, and then the companies here. So who's drilling the Hunton? The Hunton is being drilled a lot by Gas Stars, the #1 company, okay? And Husky Ventures is right there ahead, and you can see the contribution of the other players. So let's take a look now at each of these reservoirs, the major reservoirs in turn, and see what we see. And one of the interesting ones here is the Cherokee. And I was surprised, I remember when we got to the Cherokee, because what do you notice? First of all, it's only up in the northeast section of the play. It's responsible for a lot of the good wells down through that nice little area. It is shallower up here. And really, you can see it here. It is dominated by Chesapeake, a little bit of Chaparral's portfolio, and almost all of Blake. So Blake and Chesapeake are heavily into drilling the Cherokee Reservoir in this area. It has generally good productivity. It's clocking in at about 400, and down there, it's not very gassy. And frankly, this is our estimated break-even price, 57. Now that's overall time, so the best wells in this are getting substantially better than that, probably in the low 40s. So Cherokee Reservoir actually looks pretty good, but is limited, and is particularly good right down the middle of the corridor, and maybe not so much up to the northwest. The Hunton, how's the Hunton do? Well, the Hunton, frankly, doesn't look all that great. And you can see it's dominated by some small players, as we saw down here. Has relatively high break-even price, low oil productivity. So that's probably not one of the premier reservoirs. Merrimack, we have here. That's unbenched Merrimack, as you can see down here. It looks fairly good, but let's focus our time on the lower Merrimack. So what am I seeing here? Clearly I'm seeing some very good wells around here, and then some middling and poor wells as I move off to the east and drift to the northeast. Not much lower Merrimack production out here into Dewey, relatively concentrated right here. It's got great oil production coming in at around 500 barrels a day on average. That's nice. It's in the portfolio of most of the top players, and you can see Newfield is very heavy in there, as is Devon. But again, it doesn't form the bulk of anyone's portfolio, really, which I find kind of interesting. Second lowest break-even price out there. The upper Merrimack here, now you can see it also is the same set of players. So in general, people that have access to it have access to the lower Merrimack as well. It's got probably the best economics in the whole play, and has a nice little sweet spot that extends further to the east than the lower Merrimack did, and maybe has a little bit of overlap. So if you're in an area right through here, you probably have access to both of these reservoirs. It's a relatively small area, but it's quite nice. Next, go on the Mississippi Lime. It's only a few wells, so we won't bother with that. Now my lower Osage. My lower Osage is responsible for a number of those great wells that we saw over in northern Dewey County, and then frankly is pretty hit or miss. When you get it spread among a whole number of players, you don't have a lot of concentration, and it happens to be relatively gassy compared to some of the others. The upper Osage is a very different sort of beast, and you can see it is spread all across the eastern portion and down into the south, and is responsible for someone like Oklahoma Energy as the bulk of their portfolio, and forms an important contribution of some of the smaller players. And finally, the Woodford, just to show what we got. We don't think the Woodford does all that well here. You can see it's sort of a fringy play and has relatively few wells that end up in the top quintile of the play. So the point I want to leave you with, the upshot of all of this really, is that we're looking at a play where I'm starting to get a sweet spot running through here, dominated by the upper and partially the lower Merrimack. I have good access to Cherokee right through this, but it may be fairly limited, and I have some Osage going on up here on Dewey. Once I start moving on the periphery of the play, it frankly seems to show relatively disappointing results. It's still spotty and heterogeneous. We expect the play to do well overall, but we also can see from this that it's relatively limited in its geography, especially if you're looking for multi-zone potential. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next month with another look at what's new in the data.